This video will serve for some of us as a refresher on adding and subtracting decimals. Let's be sure to put our date and topic at the top of the page. Our topic will be adding and subtracting decimals. And of course, as always, we have an essential question. Our essential question is, what is the algorithm for adding and subtracting decimals? One thing I always like to keep in mind while I'm working with decimals is estimation. Estimating my answer before I begin will help me to make sure that I'm following the algorithm correctly. If my answer is unreasonable or far from my estimate, that's usually a sign that I set my algorithm up incorrectly. Adding and subtracting decimals is a lot like adding and subtracting whole numbers, right? They're really not too different. When we add, we are always careful to line up place values. For example, if I needed to add 4,235 and 13, I would have to keep track of the place values as I'm working with those numbers. To do this, I would line these up vertically like this. The ones values are lined up, the tens, the hundreds, and the thousands, right? That's how I would line it up. I would never do something like this, right? In this situation, I have the 4,000 lined up with the 110, right? That would never work. I always have to make sure I keep my place values lined up. The same is true with decimal addition. We always want to be sure the decimals are lined up so that the rest of the place values are also lined up. From there, it's addition as usual. Let's see how it looks with an example. So here I have 3 and 42 hundredths, and I'm adding 5 and 8 tenths. I'm just going to start first by estimating. So I know that 3 and 42 hundredths is about 3, and I know that 5 and 8 tenths is about 6. So my answer, if I do this correctly, should be in the ballpark of the number 9. Right? So that's something I'm going to keep in mind as I'm going. I'm going to set this up by lining it up vertically, just like I would do with normal addition. And I actually tend to put the larger value on top. In this case, the 5 and 8 tenths is larger than the 3 and 42 hundredths. It's a good habit to get into because you'll need to do it when you're doing subtraction. So I have my 5 and 8 tenths, and I'm going to make sure my decimals are lined up, right, so that I have my place values lined up. So below my 5, I'll put the 3. Those are my whole numbers. And then I'm going to put my 4 tenths and 2 hundredths, my 42 hundredths. From there, I would just add as normal. I know that my decimal place is not going to move, so I'm going to keep that right where it is even before I start the addition. There's nothing in this spot. I'm just going to put a 0 as a placeholder here because I have 8 tenths. And I don't have any hundredths, so my 0 can represent those 0 hundredths. Then I'll just add as normal. And I get an answer of 9 and 22 hundredths. And that's pretty good. That's close to what my estimate was. If I had lined this up incorrectly, I might have gotten something completely off base, far from 9, and that would have been a good indicator that I had made a mistake somewhere along the way. I'll give you another one, right, just so we can practice, and we'll see how you do. This time, we have 4 and 4 hundredths, or maybe $4.04, and we're adding it with 8 tenths. So take a moment to estimate, and then set it up vertically, lining up your decimal, and go ahead and solve your addition. How'd you do? I got 4 and 84 hundredths. Because I made sure to line all of my place values up. I didn't have anything in this spot, so I just put a placeholder of a 0. Now we'll do the same thing with subtraction. Just as adding decimals is similar to adding whole numbers, subtracting decimals is similar to subtracting whole numbers. The most important part, again, is making sure we've lined up our numbers correctly so the place values are all one on top of each other, right? They're lined up. So here I have 6 and 31 hundredths minus 2 and a tenth. I'll do my estimating first as always, right? So this is about 6, and I'm subtracting about 2, so my answer should probably be somewhere in the ballpark of 4 if I do this correctly. My larger number is the 6 and 3100s, excuse me. I'm going to make sure my decimal is lined up, and then I'm going to do my 2 and 1/10. So I have my whole numbers lined up, I have my tenths lined up. There's nothing in this space, so I'm going to go ahead and put a place value of 0. And then I will subtract as I normally would, right? 1 minus 0, 3 minus 1. My decimal place does not move. And 6 minus 2 is 4. I got ahead of myself there. My answer was 4 and 2100ths, not far off from my estimate. So I can feel pretty confident that I set this up correctly. Sometimes when we're subtracting decimals, just like when we're subtracting whole numbers, we come across a situation where we might need to borrow. So let's just take a look at that here with decimals. Here I have 7 and 1600ths, and I want you to subtract from that 3 and 4300ths. Right? A good place to start would be to estimate. This is about 7, and this is close to 3.5, right? But I could estimate it just as 3 if I wanted to just keep it whole numbers. So my answer is going to be around 4 if I'm doing this correctly. I'll go ahead and set this up as I normally would. Here's my larger number on top. I'm going to make sure my decimal places are lined up, and then I can fill in the place value here, and I'll subtract. I know my decimal place is going to be right there. It's not going to move. 6 minus 3 is 3. We cannot subtract 4 from 1, right? We can't do 1 minus 4. So just like we would normally do with any other subtraction, we go to the place value over and we borrow. I'm going to take this and turn it into a 6, right? And I'm going to borrow and place my 10s over here. So this becomes 11, right? 11 then minus 4 is 7. Then I have a 6 minus 3, which is 3. My answer here is 3 and 7300ths, which is, if I round up, close to 4. Let's just have you do one practice one. We'll see how you did, and that'll be the end of this video. So take a moment to set this up. I'm asking you to subtract 14 and 8200ths minus 2 and 6/10. As always, give yourself a time to estimate your answer first, and then be sure to line up your decimal and do your subtraction. How'd you do? I got an answer of 12 and 2200ths. Notice that I had to use a place value here because there was no digit in the hundredths place. So the essential question was what the algorithm is for adding and subtracting decimals. As we saw, it's really just the same process that we use for adding and subtracting whole numbers. We just have to pay careful attention that we've lined up our places correctly.